Hello everyone, I hope you're all keeping well, healthy and happy. I would like to talk to you, about you, with you. Okay? Now, there are a lot of people out there, false teachers specifically, false gurus and so on, that will speak at you as if they know everything that is to do with you as a human being, despite the fact that they know nothing of the infinite complexity of that which makes you specifically the person that you are, the individual that you are. And nowhere is this more prevalent than in this self-help, self-improvement movement that has been going on for a long time now. You see, the idea that these people want to sell you, and it is the biggest con of all time, it's the biggest lie you have ever been sold, is that there's something wrong with you. I'm here to tell you there is nothing wrong with you, right? They will tell you that you need to become good. I'm telling you, you don't need to become anything. You don't need to become good. You already are good. Now, this will shock a lot of people, my saying this. Because when they look at the world from a macroscopic viewpoint, right, they see all this evil that is ongoing around them. And so therefore they assume, quite wrongly actually, but they assume that this is because the human beings that are alive today are in some way flawed. This is nonsense. The human beings themselves are not flawed. They are doing exactly what they were designed by nature to do. Okay? In each human being, underneath all the layers of schooling, of programming, persuasion, coercion, media manipulation, and all these flashy sales gimmicks, underneath all of that is a person born with the capacity and the potential to be a truly valuable human being. Of course, depending on the life choices they make, they can become a horrendously evil human being too, but that is dependent on their life choices and actions. Right? But these folks want to sell you the idea that all that is going wrong in the world is your fault. And there are a lot of these people, even inside these conspiracy movements and whatever else, they want to sell you this nonsense to pin the blame on you. Okay, now I'm not absolving people of their responsibilities when it comes to their actions. Understand this. But at the same time, what if none of this was actually your fault at all? Okay, this is the most shocking part of this, to see this in the current time where the blame is being heaped on the people, on human beings, when the real blame perhaps rests with the methods inside the system which do not work. Okay? Perhaps it's the system that doesn't work, whichever system it is that is being applied in whatever case. This does not cross the minds of most folks. Okay? It doesn't cross their minds because they themselves are forced, with all of this programming, with all of this persuasion, to believe these things that they want to believe. There's a part of them that wants to believe this because it's much easier than dealing with the fact that there is this behemoth, this monstrosity that is subverting entirely human consciousness. Okay? I'll get into that a little bit later on. But the fundamental point here is that the young people that are growing up today are constantly being told that there's something wrong with them. Even the older generations, they're constantly being told there's something wrong with them. What if nothing's wrong with them? Except for the fact that they believed something false right? What if nothing at the core of who they are is wrong at all? That's a thought that, people don't want to really, again, as I say, entertain. Right? They don't really want to sit down and think about it because it's frightening to know that greater forces than themselves are shaping the course of human existence. Okay? But getting back to the point I was making, it's because of this delusion, right, that people have come to believe another falsehood, and that is that the accumulation of information is in itself knowledge. Accumulation of information is not knowledge, okay? It's not wisdom. The process of knowing something comes from lived experience. Doesn't come from just gathering information. Now, information can be utilized. It can be used to gain knowledge if it's applied. Okay? But without it, without that application of this information in any real useful sense, that's not knowledge. That's just superfluous data. It doesn't do anything. It's just dormant. Okay? And they also confuse accumulation of information with wisdom. It is not wisdom. You see, wisdom comes from doing. Wisdom is the doing. It's in the doing of the action. Right? And provided that that action is correct, and I'm speaking in the sense of true morality here, philosophically speaking, provided that action is correct, i.e. it doesn't harm anyone, then it is wise. It might not be the highest form of wisdom, or it might well be the highest form of wisdom depending on what is done. Okay, I don't want to confuse you folks out there too much, but this is something quite important. The other thing is that intelligence is often confused with wisdom. And this makes me really angry. Profoundly so. Because intelligence is not wisdom. You see, so many people out there, right, inside all these various ideological, let's call them communities. They're not actually communities, they're cults. Okay? So many people in them view intelligence as the ultimate peak of all that there is. This is also nonsensical. Intelligence is not wisdom. There's a lot of folks out there that think that intelligence quotients are the be-all and end-all of life. There's a couple of things I want to say about that. First of all, if you measure intelligence using the intelligence quotient, people's IQs, then that's a fair thing to do. It will give you a decent understanding of what a person's IQ might be. But keep in mind, again, intelligence is not wisdom. So to give you a concrete example of this, if you look at East Asians, specifically the Chinese, let's say, but any East Asian country, they have a propensity and a tendency towards tyranny. This is not wisdom. Okay, take a look at the communist revolution in China, the proliferation of communist thought and ideals throughout East Asia, the totalitarian regimes that erected themselves, and you will see that these people, although they are the most intelligent people around according to any scale of IQ, any measurement of IQ, because they have this mentality of enslavement, they're not wise. Now, some of the ancient cultures from East Asia were wise, but that's faded away. It's gone by the wayside, sadly, hasn't it? So never ever confuse intelligence with wisdom. Intelligence, although it's a good marker in some respects for the achievements and accoutrements that come with success in life as it's measured by most folks, as it's defined by most folks, it isn't necessarily the greatest way of looking at civilizations. Wisdom is. The proliferation of philosophy is. Okay? Otherwise, what you end up with is diving into a bubble of believing in pure scientism. It becomes the religious worship of pseudoscience. Not true science, but pseudoscience. See, true science is neutral. But when you have people trying to pervert science for ideological reasons, then it descends into a belief. There's much more I could say on that, but I won't. The other point I'd like to make in regards to confusing intelligence with wisdom is that intelligence can help you figure out answers to certain things, but not to things that are going to be forever unknown. Okay? For that, it takes something else entirely. Okay? And by the way, someone with little intelligence can actually be wise. This startles a whole bunch of folks to hear this in this modern time that we're living in, where the ego is worshipped, right? There's this intellectual arrogance that is seen as a good thing. It's hero worshipped. Okay? But it shouldn't be. And the reason it shouldn't be is because that intellectual arrogance always leads to the sense of superiority and the sense that others are inferior. And there is no discernible measure by which you can say someone is inferior. A person can be ignorant. Okay, a person can be ignorant. They can oftentimes facilitate those things. Sometimes they take part in actions that are evil. As I've defined evil before, that is to cause harm to others. But on the flip side of that, even without the intelligence, they can still do great good. Take, for example, the folks that work as hard as they can in order to provide for their families, who might not be rocket scientists, but they're doing what needs to be done to make sure that the future generations are properly cared for, properly looked after. And if they are wise enough to also have the right kind of parenting skills, you probably couldn't meet a wiser person. Okay? But the problem in the world today isn't necessarily the lack of intelligence, although that is a fundamental issue, I think, on many fronts. It's the case that there is a lack of wisdom today. Okay, there's a lack of wisdom today that used to exist before. Complete lack of it. Everywhere you look, from first world countries to third world countries to other types of countries, countries that aren't even countries anymore, you look anywhere and you will see that it is that lack of wisdom. Wisdom is, as I say, the application of knowledge, the application of information that's gathered, but also there's also a form of wisdom that isn't properly publicly acknowledged, and that is compassion. Now, compassion has to exist in moderation. Too much compassion in your society will collapse. Okay? And we're seeing that, by the way, this over-reliance on compassion and empathy to the point where it's self-destructive. Somebody who's compassionately self-destructive is no better, no wiser than the person who's intellectually arrogant. And by the way, sometimes these two things go hand in hand. I noticed, just as an aside, because this is just a chat between us, as it were, I noticed that oftentimes there are people that are really intellectually arrogant who think that they know what's best for everyone. And without knowing it, because of their ignorance, because of the lack of wisdom, they end up doing things that are harmful to themselves. Self-annihilation is not a virtue. Okay, self-annihilation is not a virtue. Yet today it's viewed as some kind of virtuous thing. It's truly not. It's one of the most horrendous evil acts you can ever do. But it's been promoted because the notion of sacrifice, self-sacrifice, which is sometimes required, which exists in certain theological belief systems, was distorted. Okay? It was distorted and made into something that it was never meant to be. So you see that. You know, you can never be compassionate to a point where you end up damaging yourself or others around you for the sake of someone else. Right? And again, they suffer from this same delusion of having this low-resolution image of other people, because there's infinite complexity in other human beings. And you can only tell the goodness of someone or the evil of someone by looking at their actions. Okay, you can only tell that by looking at their actions. But of course, these people don't do that. They are great believers in the blank slate theory and so on, and all kinds of ridiculous things. Intelligence, by the way, may not be quite the boon that we think it is. It's highly likely, it's actually quite probable, in fact, according to most proper thinkers out there. They looked at the ways in which societies and civilizations evolved. And they said, hang on a second, why is it that these societies that are primitive thrive, and societies that have become so, let's call it advanced, it's really not advancement at all, but that's another thing entirely. Let's say the technological abilities that exist, right, have exponentially increased in certain civilizations, like in the West, and yet they're not thriving. They're collapsing. And the answer is because intelligence leads to that. Okay, intelligence leads to that. Intelligence leads to your own self-destruction if it is unchecked, if it is arrogant. And that's what's going on. You know, and there's all this confusion right now. And as I say, young people especially are very, very confused. They don't know where to turn because nobody will tell them. And no one will speak to them and tell them that, hang on a second, this isn't your fault. Young men don't get told that this isn't their fault. You have nuts out there, okay? Or I'd actually call them morons in real terms. I don't think they're nuts. I think they are truly moronic in suggesting the young people need to take, you'll hear this a lot, take responsibility for things that were never their fault. For political systems that were established before they were born. Okay, for social ills that have existed since time immemorial. They're told that they need to take responsibility for that they need to go save the world. You can't do that. And it doesn't matter, by the way, whether the ideology is socialist or new conservatism, let's call it. Okay, because both of these things heap the blame onto the younger generations, and it's the baby boomers, by the way, that are doing this. Okay, they're blaming the young people of today for what has happened before their time. Okay? And that is wholly wrong. You can't do that. No person can take responsibility for other people or for systems of government or for religious institutions or whatever else that they did not create. They did not shape. This notion, and this irks me as well, by the way. I guess I'm just getting a lot of this off my chest, and I'm sorry for that, but here's the thing, this notion that the voting preferences of young people, right? You'll understand what I mean by this once you grasp it. That the voting preferences of young people are responsible. Okay? Or certain voting blocks are responsible. That's true to a degree, but it's also seriously not true. It's a complete falsehood on one level. Why? Because what choice is there in voting? Let's take American politics as one example. You've got the Republican Party, which is just as corrupt and just as fucked up as the Democratic Party. Okay, they share the same beliefs, by the way. It's a uniparty system with the illusion of two parties. And of course, you've got other parties in there, third parties like the Greens or whatever else, you know. I don't pay much attention to them, but generally in politics, that's the way that the system is designed. Yeah, in the UK, the same thing is true. You've got the Conservatives and Labour, and certainly the current Conservative Party, but actually this has been the case since its inception, I would say. And then there are arguments for and against that, each to their own, right? But insofar as I've looked at it, this is very much the case. It mimics the other party. Okay, the Conservative Party mimics the other party. It is exactly on the same, it falls on the same ideological lines as the other party. Right? So the so-called conservatives are basically socialists. So what choice do young people truly have? Or any voting bloc, for that matter, when none of them are willing to stand up with courage and say, oh, do you know what? See that thing that's happening in society? That's wrong. That's immoral. And it needs to be addressed. Or that thing over there that's happening could be destructive to our society, whether it's matters of employment, whether it's matters of immigration, or whatever else it is. They're not offering real solutions, you see, because they have none. They can only offer the same thing in different packaging. This is why I despise those people in the older generations that say, oh, it's the young people's fault because of their voting preferences. Fuck you. You know nothing. If that is your attitude and your line, you know nothing. In fact, you have contributed to the problem. It's not the young people's fault. And if they are the way they are, whose fault is that truly? Where does the blame lie? Where does the moral culpability lie? With the older generations, because parental abandonment produces a lot of these phenomena that we're seeing, fatherless homes and so on, right? Kids that grow up without fathers, there's good data that shows this, they end up really being very messed up psychologically and otherwise. And the same thing goes for mothers that can't raise their children properly as well. And it doesn't have to be just the case with single mothers. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone in society. There are level-headed kids out there that had good parents. Okay? But I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about those people that are in the majority, in the aggregate, that have serious issues because of the choices and decisions that were made before they even came into this world. And I won't even go into the problems of abuse that exist inside every culture. Okay? First world countries, Western cultures, this is endemic, right? There are folks that want to point out that this is only a problem in third world countries. They are liars. They are frauds. Now, nobody, let me add this. This is very important for you to grasp this, to understand this. Nobody has critiqued and criticized various cultures, various religious ethoses and beliefs as much as I have. But it is a lie to say that these problems do not exist in the West, that they have not proliferated in seriously harmful ways. Our governmental institutions are entirely infested with this problem. Whether it's sexual child abuse or physical child abuse, it goes on everywhere. Why do you think that they were covering up the Rotherham scandal? Do you really think it was because of cultural sensitivity? Well, maybe it was, but that doesn't explain the issues with, for example, the Jimmy Savile scandal. Everything that was going on inside the BBC. The other various scandals that emerged following that one. All of these child abuse rings that are busted all the time. This problem is more endemic than people want to admit. Okay? And how many people, by the way, if this isn't such a serious issue, how many people are there in society in general that said anything for or in support of these victims of child abuse? Did you see any protests outside of the Houses of Parliament? This is the silence of the British people. And the same thing goes on in the United States of America as well. People want to say that they're, that they're better. This is another point. I was going to get to it later, but let me say this. People want to scream that their culture is better, they themselves are better than other people. Okay? And I said this. But here's the thing about that. You see, the concept of better, it only applies when you relate one thing to another thing. It's relative. Do you understand the meaning of the word relate? Relative. Right? So, it's dependent upon another culture being worse than you. So that doesn't speak particularly highly of either. Okay? It is true, yes, some cultures are better than others. I have said this many, many times. This blank slate nonsense that the far left, for example, touts all the time. And they say, all cultures are equal, all cultures are the same. That's simply not true. There are varying degrees in terms of the health of a society and the practices within a society. Okay, but it's no clean bill of health to have one society marginally better than another. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay, we need to stop the propagandizing. Propaganda is excessively dangerous, and for ideological purposes and reasons, folks are doing this left, right, and centre. And I'm not just talking politically, by the way, right? I'm saying across the board, people are doing this. because they don't know how to grapple with the issues that exist. They have no means, no tools with which to deal with any of the endemic societal or environmental problems of today. And they've been fed so much bullshit for such a long time that they've actually started to buy into a lot of the nonsense that's trotted out by governments, by various propaganda institutions, media stations, and so on. Folks have just started buying into it wholesale, and they don't realize this. Many people will say in this day and age, they'll say, the media puts out fake news. But they don't realize that sometimes they themselves are parroting that fake news. There's a hypocrisy there. And it's not, to be fair, I'll give them this, it's not entirely their fault. What happens is these ideas seep into the consciousness of an individual. It seeps into the consciousness of a person. And everyone gets afflicted. I, myself, for years, was afflicted with this problem. So, you have to start the journey of deprogramming. You see, when you're born, you are the result, okay? The person you are today, let me say this first of all. The person you are today is the result of your environment, your genetics, and your thoughts. And you are not your thoughts, incidentally. Okay? People have this messed up idea that their thoughts are them. Your thoughts don't come from you. Okay? Your thoughts don't come from you. The thoughts I'm relating here to yourselves out there, these are not my thoughts. People will say, oh, it's because these must be his thoughts. They're not. These thoughts have been around for centuries, thousands of years, millennia, right? They've been around for so long. At least someone else will have thought of them. You understand, right? There's nothing new here that I'm telling you. But anyway, the point I was making is your environment and your genetics and your thoughts shape who you've become. Okay? And that is all the end result of, what goes on in this world. And right now it's not a healthy state of being for most people, right? They're not well adjusted because they are adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And if you call that well adjusted, well, then you're out your gourd. Okay? But to round this video off, I guess, because there's a whole lot I could actually speak about. To round this video off, I'll say this much. Like I said, there's nothing wrong with you. Okay? And I know I keep saying this, but it's because people need to understand this, right? If you take the seed of a flower and you plant it in the ground, okay? That's just a seed, right? And you'd say, well, that's a seed. It grows into a plant, and then maybe flowers blossom from that plant over the months or the years that follow. Did it need to self-improve? That's a very important question. Did it need to self-improve? No. Okay, the flower did not have to improve. It didn't sit there reading self-help books. It didn't listen to gurus that were telling it, oh, there's something very wrong with you, plant, and, you have to fix these problems endemic in your being or whatever. And no, the flower grows independently anyway because of the environment around it, because of its genetic constituents, and because of, in the case of plants, well, they have some thoughts, not very much. There are actually some interesting studies that show plants do sort of, I don't want to say think exactly, but they have some capacity to interact with their environment. That produces certain signals and so on within their own. They actually have a nervous system of sorts. But it's not a nervous system in the sense that we would understand in terms of animals and higher beings and so on. That's not the point, though. I'm getting sidetracked here. The point I'm trying to get across is that the seed of a plant grows into the plant it's supposed to be, right? That it's shaped to be in some ways. And in the same way, human beings, right? And if they've got a strong root to who they are, if they've got a strong sense of self, will blossom of their own right. There's nothing wrong with human beings as a whole. What's happened is that over successive generations, and we're talking over hundreds of thousands of years here, that's a fairly long time span, what has happened is that the best of who they are has been sifted and pulped out of them. And that has been done by folks that were malevolent. They themselves were born to be malevolent. See, evil will always exist. Okay, evil exists in this world because it has to, just as good exists because it has to. There's a relationship between these two things that is enormously complex. And instead of asking, why does evil exist, I think people would be better served by asking, how do we counter it? Or how do we vaccinate ourselves against it, so to speak? Right? How do we immunize ourselves against evil? That's a better question to ask. And the accompanying question is, how do you defeat evil? The answer is you don't. Right? I'm just parachuting in pearls of wisdom here. This might be me casting pearls before swine, I don't know, right? I don't think that's the case. Most of the people that have subscribed to this channel, I've noticed, are really switched on people. And that's a credit to them, to you guys, right, that are watching this. It's a credit to you. So as I was saying, to end this, the way that you defeat evil is that you don't fight it. Okay, this is going to shock people again. Don't fight evil? What are you talking about? You can't fight evil. Okay, you can't physically fight. Well, you can in some cases when it's instantiated and you have to. It is your moral duty to. But I'm talking about evil in the abstract here. You can't fight that because you don't know what it is. You don't know who it is. And even if you did, sometimes it's hard to do on a macro level. So what do? You overwhelm it. That's the big secret. That's the big secret that no one wants to tell you. You overwhelm the evil. With good. It's honestly as simple as that. And if people started doing that in greater and greater numbers, you'd find very quickly that evil dissipates. It wouldn't disappear entirely, but it would be very heavily reduced. So it's not hopeless by any means. But the odds of it happening, unfortunately, right now, are very low. Because the things that I'm talking about here, the things that I have been talking about for years now, the awareness of any of this is not there. At least not in any substantial numbers. And that's a sad thing. I mean, you could create, and I know I said I was going to close the video off, but I just want to say this as well. You could create pockets of resistance that would flourish, that would do great things. And I suspect that's actually the direction we're headed in. There will be pockets of people that will end up being sort of a last stand against evil, I suppose. You know, a last stand against those who want to do great harm, to cause suffering purposefully. There will be people that will stand up against that. You know, they will overwhelm the evil, but there will be small pockets. And that's the downside to it. Not enough people, I suspect, will have the tools and the capabilities to tackle the tentacles of it all. Anyway, that shouldn't depress you. It should actually give you some sense of inner peace, actually. Because it is true that good always overcomes evil. Like I said, by overwhelming it, right? But it takes time for people to put into practice and to bring into being again, to strip away all these layers of programming. And they may never actually fully be able to do it. It takes time to strip all of that away and go back to the root of who they were. If the root of the person is strong, okay, like a plant, like a tree, if the root is strong, then the person themselves will end up doing remarkable things. They will grow into something miraculous. You know, but that takes time. It takes effort to. It's not that you have to improve yourself. In a bizarre sense, it's actually quite the opposite of that. It's the reverse of that. And this is why I'm saying there's nothing wrong with human beings. Okay? But what they really have to do is to strip away, and it's a painful process and not a lot of people want to do it, is to strip away the falseness that has been superficially imposed on them. You know, you have to strip away all that garbage that was pumped into you, into your soft brain. You know, they said, this is what you have to believe, this is who you have to be, that's what you have to do, and so on and so forth. You have to strip all of that away. And that's a tough thing, to get back to your authentic self, to your true self. Because what is your true self? That's a whole question in and of itself. And it's one a lot of people are trying to answer, and they're finding it tough because they don't know. They've been told they're this or they're that, and here's the roles that you've got to play, and whatever else. Authenticity, you know, people use this word a lot, but they have no conception of what it actually means. It means just being true to your biological roots. It means being true to your ancestral roots, but also your environmental roots as well, and staying true to the wisdoms that you have learned through life experience. Anyway, I'll leave it there for this video, but I thought it was important to talk about this stuff because too few people actually do. And we are living in a time where people are lost and they have no map. So, there we have it. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for watching. Take good care of yourselves, and God bless every one of you.